It may only seem like yesterday, but it has already been 3 months since the release of Crossover Breakers and the ban list that would eventually put fire into the ground permanently. Except for Ninkabui, let's not talk about that. But yeah, it has been quite a long time now that we've had Ryziel and Malice. It may seem somewhat still fresh, but I think the fatigue is starting to get to people, myself included. You could see me talk about it in my earlier video about I'm starting to get a little over Ryziel. And with all that in mind, I realized we actually are pretty close to a ban list, and thus it would be perfect to make a wish list, a tradition amongst new YouTubers to see which cards they'd like to be hits. Now, the alternative is do a prediction, but meh, that's boring. So instead, I'm gonna do a bit of shopping and tell you guys what I think Konami should change, and I'll give you some of my reasonings, so that if I were to control the game, you can see how the game would end up. And before we get into the video, I'm curious what your guys' takes on this are. If you have anything you disagree with, then let me know. I'm happy to hear it out, because this is going to be a subjective perspective, not just me trying to be objective. You guys are going to get that very quickly. But also, give me your ideal wish list in the comments before you take a look. And let's see if either I can change your mind or if we already agree on something. With that said, let's jump into first the cards that I'd like to be unlimited. Now, the first card here is a card which is already unlimited in Master Duel, as Master Duel is being a lot more relaxing, I guess, almost of their hits, letting cards come back to 3. True Draco Masterpiece is a clear example of that, and that's a card I'd like to see back at 3. Now, don't get me wrong, back in the day, this was not my favorite card or anything. I had bad experiences and good experiences with and against it, but I overall don't think this is the problem. The problem card was always the floodgates that many times surrounded the Masterpiece. Still, I think it is time this card comes back, and the synergies that are opened up by a monster that's able to tribute spells and traps as well as monsters, the whole Diagram synergy really wants me to have Diagram and Masterpiece at 3. I don't think they're broken. I think you can explore, even if they're not that good, some cool strategies between the decks. Now, next up on this list is another set of monsters that has recently been brought back to 2 by Konami TCG and was never actually hit in Master Duel or even in the OCG, I think. That is Danger Jackalope and Danger Tsuchinoko. These are some of my favorite monsters. I'm going to vocal how my favorite deck of all time is actually Danger Thunder. Overall, the Dangers and Curious and Snow, they all make out some of my favorite cards, and I think they're also very fair, very unique, they're splashable, and I just really love the whole Danger mechanic. Now, I do understand that sometimes the Dangers can spiral out of control to some FTK decks. I'm kind of proof of that. But I think a lot of the time they can be used for good, for the healthiness of the game, and to really support these graveyard and engine-heavy decks. The Dangers can be a little bit of a dangerous line to draw, where their nature of their text means that power creep is hard to hit them unless cards cycle better. They are always going to be as good as the cards they draw into and the cards they're discarding to fill the grave, which I know it's a lot of different things, a lot of different cards like that too, but it's similar to like Pot of Greed in that way. It's good in its own rights, and it's only amplified by the surrounding products. So Dangers could have a world again where they are too powerful. However, I think they are overall worth it, and as long as we design the rest of Yu-Gi-Oh appropriately, we don't have a problem. Next up on this list is another card that was never hit in Japan or in Master Duel, and it's one of my favorite cards again. It's Unchained Shavara. I don't know why this card had to be a 1. When it got put to 1 in the TCG, the deck was pretty much already on the way out, as power creep was sending it off. Now, the only kind of fight back against Unchained is while the Fiendsmith cards are too generic of Fiend support for an Unchained Fiend Link deck to be prominent. That's a bit of a problem, but this list will have Fiendsmith cards hit, so for addressing that problem, then let Unchained have their deck back. The deck would not be broken, it would be a strong tier 2 option. I think having those type of decks exist are good, where players can pet deck a deck for a long period of time, get really good with it, have fun with it, and see decent results. It's not going to be the best deck. It doesn't need to be the best deck. It needs to be playable. It doesn't need to be murdered for a deck that isn't going to be a problem in the metagame. And I didn't feel like Unchained was doing anything too toxic. Caesar is a very good card, don't get me wrong, but there are so many things worse than Caesar, and I would like Unchained to come back to some of its former glory. Even if it does get some new tools, I'd like to see it continue to evolve and grow. Now, lastly, for the unlimited section, what would a Jesse Kotton wish list be without my favorite card back to 3? Because it's a tragedy that Fairy Tale Snow is banned. My heart hurts sometimes. Yeah, my love, mi amor. Only legal in Mashable and at a measly 1, or I guess it's at 3 in Japan. I almost wonder if I'm directly responsible sometimes for the hits, because it feels like whenever I do well with it, in TCG it gets hit, and in Mashable it got hit after I did well with it again. It's funny seeing now in Japan that people are playing Grass Malice to a lesser extent than the regular Malice deck, but still somewhat popular. They play 3 Snows and Grasses because that's a crazy broken synergy that they have access to. I'm curious to see how that plays out in Mashable, even with the only singular copy of Snow, but I'm still overall huge Snow fan, and I play it in every deck pretty much, not just Malice or Thunder. Now that wraps up the unlimited section. Now, there probably are a bunch of different cards in the ban list that could go back to 3 that have no reason to really be there. Moving on to the semi-limits. So semi-limits is a weird one. I've been very vocal about me not liking semi-limits too much as a tactical option. Now, what I'm looking for when a card goes to 2 is you want to hit a card in a way that affects the longevity of a deck. So what you could do is hit Reborn Tengu to 2, hit Malicious to 2, hit Skystriker Gari to 2, even matters because in a Skystriker grind game, now that does actually make a difference in their capabilities. Now, the other time when going to 2 matters is when you're trying to break apart combos capabilities. But alas, there's one other thing that I don't talk about as much, and that is to hit the overall consistency of cards, because I think it creates volatile and luck-based gameplay. But when done enough in a very controlled, careful manner, it can bring down a deck's power level. Specifically, if you're trying to decrease the chance of drawing multiples of a card that is way too powerful when you draw multiples of them. But I think there is a unique example in the metagame right now. What if we semi-limited Molcharmy, Fubulas, Perulia, and Meows? Now, I know I may look like a madman there, because what the hell is Jesse smoking? There's an explicit reason. One of the most frustrating experiences if you've played against Charmies is when 2 of them are dropped. When you get Perulia to Fubulas, it can be aggravating, but clearly it's not the same as Maxi, and overall I do find it a lot more skill testing. However, when I get double Fuid or Fubulas Perulia, I sit there and scratch my head and I'm like, how do I win this game? In the same way that when I get Maxied, I wonder, how do I do anything? My problem with these cards is when 2 of them get dropped, you are just dead. And now, having multiple exist in high amounts means that it's harder to ash them, harder to cross hit them, harder to call by them. But I don't know, man. The feeling of getting double Fuid, it's not something I'm particularly keen of. I would be happy to see it thrown away. Now, you could argue that this maybe works to the detriment of going second, but I still think that the overall balancing of the rest of the format still needs to allow going second without the reliance of Molcharmies. Because the Molcharmies can also create some awkward gameplay where you may need to go first because you put 9 bricks in your deck, or 6 bricks, depending on how many Charmies, or games where you just don't draw any still. Over-reliance on non-engine, regardless, is a bad thing, so I don't want the Charmies to be the center point of a format where you need them, because that falls back into the issue that Maxi had. Now, for semi-limits, that's really all I had in mind. It may be kind of wild as a theory, but that's the only thing that I felt was suitable for semi-limits. There's no cards like Reborn Tengu or Malicious right now that I think are a problem on the metagame, so other things are either hit harsher or not at all. But let me know specifically what you think on this Molcharmy hit. It's a little bit more out there of an idea, and I don't know if I'm completely off base with this or if it's something that you guys agree with. But alas, let's move on to the real hits. What cards do I want limited? So let's start it off with the Fiendsmith cards. So this is one that people have been calling for a hit for a while. And truthfully, I don't know how I want to hit this. I don't mind the fact that Fiendsmiths exist in the way that lets you convert your 2 bodies on field into something else at the cost of some cards in your deck and extra deck. And it creates interesting deck building choices. However, yeah, I won't forego the fact that it has taken over a huge part of modern deck building. It does need to be dialed back in some degree. To what degree, though, leaves a lot to be seen, right? Do you hit the deck at its complete core? Do you hit Requiem? Do you hit the deck in its genericness and hit the Moon? Do you hit the deck in a consistency manner? Do you try limit things? So these are all the problems I'm grappling with, and truthfully, I don't have a good answer. What I have noticed is that at least they're not as much of a problem in OCG. Now, if you don't know, Tracked and Engraver are both limited in the OCG. What this means is drawing these as starters and extenders is a lot less likely. And if you want to play an Engraver package to summon from the deck, you can. But now if you're adding just like 1 Lacrima, 1 Engraver, that's 2 bricks in your deck. Leaves you more vulnerable to Ash, more vulnerable to Bestials. It's all over significantly more impactful with those cards out one. So I'm going to go with the OCG route, and it may seem uninspired, but I think it may tame or tone down this means of the cards into a lot more controllable of an engine, but not killing it. So we can still make the choice to include it in certain formats, because I truthfully liked the cards, even if they're not perfect. An important thing to know here as well is that it also means you can't Engraver Requiem into Engraver. That is pretty big, at least I've just noticed in National when I've played only 2 Engravers, that can come up sometimes. And it leaves you in a bit of an awkward spot, some points where you can't refill the grave as fast or, get to what you actually want to get to. Still, I may be going too lenient on Fiendsmiths, or is this too hard in your opinion? Let me know if you would go harder on this deck, because I know a lot of people have this big disdain for Fiendsmith, and I somewhat get it. Nothing needs to last forever, and I'm okay with decks having their time and moving on as we make way for new, exciting metas. And in that kind of vein and feeling, let's talk about Ryzel. Now, I talked already about how I'm getting kind of over Ryzel and a bit too powerful. Now, one of the biggest hits I think you can do to Ryzel that is still going to keep it playable, but going to affect them in a meaningful way is X Ryzel to 1. Now, again, this is taking inspiration from OCG. For one, X Ryzel being limited means that it's a lot less likely for the Ryzel player to just start X Ryzel. And if they're going to search it off as 7th attack and say Bonfire, at least gives you a little bit of warning to plan around it, or the openness to Ash it, or any other negates if you have Judgments when you go first, just to try and prevent the X from happening. Now, the alternative there beats the ban like Aggregator, but I can argue the card would still be too good because X sending whatever on turn 1, and then on the next turn as follow-up sending Eclipse Twins is incredibly powerful. The thing is with X Style 1, however, is if you can't resolve Cross because Duo got negated and X is stuck in your grave, that means it's not going to be a problem on the backswing. And I think that does make it more manageable, specifically when you're able to hand trap the Duo and then you normal summon and just commit your turn into Typhon, which sucks but can work. Now what you have to hold off on the backswing again is not a barrage of infinite pushes, it's Ice and Sword and Node at the most, which is still pretty hefty. It's still fairly powerful, but it's not X send Twins, which is so brutally broken. And while I typically don't like consistency hits, I think Japan was right on the mark with hitting X to 1, and that's where this card deserves to be if you want to keep the Ryzel deck still alive. Now, obviously, Ryzel is still looking very strong in Japan with the support from Alliance Insight, so it's concerning that maybe you need to take more aggressive hits. The biggest problem is with Star Ryzel being able to search Cross in the future, it gives you more ways to access your recycle of X without needing to resolve Duo. So maybe we need to reassess the situation. But for now, I'm going to say X to 1, and we'll see if that's a bad idea. And in the same kind of boat, I want to put Bonfire to 1. Bonfire's been a problem since its release, man. Like, searching Poplar, searching X, I'm over it. I want you also forced to play 7th Tachyon. That way the Ryzel deck can't just put Fiendsmith combos in there. But you can argue takes away from creativity, but also should open up the rest of the format to allow back in creativity in other decks. Either way, yeah, I think this is a good idea because Bonfire, it's a good card. Like it's reinforcement of the army. Reinforcement of the army is L1. Other searchers like Tanky or Fossil aren't L1 because you can say there aren't enough good search targets. But Bonfire is not the case anymore. The Snake Eye cards and the Ryzel cards are so broken that like I think Bonfire's proved that it could be L1 now. But that wraps up my limited section. And now let's talk about the cards that I want banned, and this is the largest section on my list. So first, let's start off with the trio of lingering floods I'd like to see rot in hell. Abyss Dweller, Dimension Shifter, Artifact Lancia. These 3 are some of the biggest culprits in ending the turn of this format before it ever had a chance to begin. Now, Dweller may not be ending them many turns this format because people can't even play the decks where Dweller works. And now, Mermail and Fire King have had some fringe success still despite Dweller. I think there would be actual viable meta options if Dweller was just gone. I still think Mermail and Fire King aren't as good as Rise or Malice, largely in part, Dweller is stupid. And Lancia is a weird one, right? Where Lancia, like, it's gonna be scary. Oh shit, Malice is gonna be broken. But there are ways to beat Malice with like the Burial from a Different Dimension or Gravekeeper Inscription into the field. Inscription as a flood can also be kind of weird because it is kind of a lingering flood. I mean, it is, but maybe I've what's it called? What's the word? Double standard myself here. Yeah, Malice deserves it. I'm trying to throw Malice a bone right now with banning Lancia. Now you may wonder though, okay, if we're banning those 3 Lingering Floodgates, which I hope most of you agree with, Malice is just the best deck, right? Because I haven't hit any Malice cards. Well, here's where you're wrong. Malice Whitebinder. Yeah, so I would like this card to be banned. Why? I think this card is very dumb, how it rips apart the graveyard and his incredible follow-up. It's just so obscene. It's also just good to start with because it's a trap. So it doesn't make it like an investment to make first. It replaces itself immediately. And then it's also broken follow-up, which is insane. There's the Flame Burge. My biggest thing here is I think this card is just way overtuned. It's so much more powerful than everything else. And you can still get your combos rolling through the Banished from deck. We're getting new Malice support cards in Alliance in sight. And in theory, your infield should still be fine. Maybe I'm coping, but I think it makes the deck a lot more manageable. And also, and importantly, you aren't going to get Lancia anymore. So you have to actually play your turn 1. This is contingent on the fact that Lancia isn't here because I want Malice to be an appropriate deck to play on its own right without having Silver Bullet Floodgates against it, but also not being unbearable and unbeatable on its own right. Which it can be hard to balance, but I think banning Whitebinder is the way to do so. As tough as it may be to hear, the option that I've gone with is ban Malice Whitebinder. Now, I have 2 last cards in this forbidden section that have been a bit of a stain in the Yu-Gi-Oh meta. The first one is Cross Out Designator. This one should not be that much of a surprise, and people have been calling for it to get hit for a while now. Truthfully, I like how this card interacts with the Charmies in a way where it makes the Charmies a little more manageable, but it comes at the cost of deck building restrictions. Although still, Cross Out has been way too powerful in mirror matches, and the fact that it negates essentially anything is a bit too much for me to just ignore. Now, for those who say get a limited like Mash Duel and OCG, yeah, it's an improvement because it's out 1, but when Cross Out happens against you in Mash Duel, you're still annoyed. So, in my opinion, I would rather the card just get axed altogether and not have to deal with the bullshit at any point. And that brings me to the final card. Now, this final card here is another hit to Malice. And yeah, I know I look like a grumpy old hag just mad with Malice who's salty over losing. I'm not. That's not actually a Malice hit, although it does probably affect Malice the most. It is none other than Bestial Magnamut. Yeah, so I've been vocal about this card being broken and being warranting for a ban for a while now, but it has really felt kind of gross where for months now when that card drops, my chest drops a little bit. I'm like, Jewish would already have been good against me, but Magnamut feels like cheating. And that's just searching other bestials in the end phase. But when it searches a 10-pie monster or a dragon starter, like that's stupid. It's broken in dragon decks in a way that it shouldn't be. Like, it would still be good, and you could still even debate banning it if it searched bestials only. Why does it search any dragon from your grave or deck? It is so powerful. Like the bestials are already good on their own, and I have no doubt that in some formats you will still see Jewish Worm C play on its own because the card is good. In fact, we even saw it when Caesar was prominent and Magnamut became worse because of Caesar. You could just play 3 Druids in a deck, and that was a feasible strategy. Magnamut making them crazy 1-in-1 packages or just broken in dragon decks, I think is a step too far. And I also think this can kind of restrict how future dragons can be designed just because what Magnamut encourages. So while I've had my fair share of fun with Magnamut, I think it is just a notch or 2 or 3 too powerful. And if this doesn't get banned now, I think this card will get banned. Now, obviously, it sucks that you lose the Lubellion to Magnamut synergy because that's a powerful play that I don't like to rip apart. But again, if it said search a bestial instead of a dragon, I would be so much more closer to being on board of this. But this is just crazy, man. But okay, that is my full ban list wish list, and it's a doozy. Obviously, I show favoritism to my favorite decks, and I'm a little harsher on the decks that I dislike, but it still is done with intent and purpose and with some sort of balancing in mind. I think this would tone down the 3 biggest threats in the current format, as well as tamper it down the Mole Charmies, give me back my love Snow, and give us some cool options with Dangers, True Dracos, and Unchained. Let me know what you guys think. If this looks like too radical of a list or not radical enough, what you guys would do and all sorts. With that said, I'll see you all next time. Have a good one. Peace.